So the logical next step after building our hello world example would be to create a small but interesting and functional application. And what we're going to do is a little to-do application. So in our command line, we are going to use the Aurelia CLI to create a new to-do application. We can do this, if you recall, by typing AU, new, and then the application name, which in this case is going to be to-do. And we are going to, at least in my case, I'm going to select ESNext. If you'd like to do TypeScript, that's perfectly fine. And I will create the project, and I will install the project dependencies. And as we've seen, this can take a little bit of time, so I will cut the video back in a moment. Great, so our application has been generated. Let's go ahead and change into our to-do list application directory. And let's open our code editor. Okay, so here we are. We have seen this file structure before in our previous tutorial. So let's go ahead and open the source directory and recall that we have this app.html view and the app.js ViewModel. One thing I'm going to do before we start digging in here is I'm going to just create a simple class, and this is just going to be JavaScript. So we're going to create a new file and say export class to do. And let's just go ahead and save it in the source directory as todo.js. And so when we want to new up one of these to-do objects, we are going to construct it with a description, because every to-do list item is going to have some sort of description. And we can say this.description. We'll just say that that equals description. And then also we can have a property called this.done. And we can just say that whenever you new up one of these to-do objects, well, you're probably not adding it to the list if it's finished. So we're going to say this.done equals false. So now that we've created our to-do class, we can go back over to our app ViewModel and import it. We can do that by typing import. Let's grab the to-do class from, and this will be relative to the source directory. So from to-do, and we do not need to include JS. Great. So what I'll do now in the constructor of my view model is I'm just going to create one to-do item right now. So we'll call it this.todo equals, and we will say it's a new to-do. And of course, if we switch back over to our to-do class, whenever we new up one of these objects, we have to pass a description. So we will pass, for example, clean my room. Great. So now we should expect that this.todo equals a new to-do object. This instance of the object is going to have a description property of clean my room. And if we look back at the class, we are going to say it's also going to have a done property set to false. So we now have this in our view model, so we can go over to our view and say, hey, maybe we can access that information. Ultimately, we're going to want this to be a list, so I'm going to say unordered list and list item, and let's get our to-do description. Save that there. I'm going to go to my console and I'll type AU run, and I'm going to add this watch flag, which you're going to find very helpful. What's going to happen is that instead of having to continually run AU run to build and test your application, this watch flag will watch for most of the changes that happen to your code base while you're editing it, and you won't have to keep on doing that. So now my project should be available at localhost 9000. I will go ahead and create a new Chrome tab there and go. And perfect. We have hello world. We have clean my room. That's great. So if I go back to my code, we can also say, well, I also know that we have a done property for this to do object. So I can just go ahead and use another template literal to bind that. And yeah, it's false. That's what we expected it to be. Of course, just saying that it's false doesn't really make much sense. We'd probably rather have some sort of indication, like a checkbox that we can say is false or true. So let's just go ahead and add a checkbox here. Of course, getting ahead of myself. So input type is checkbox. And so what I'm going to show you now is that we can use some of Aurelia's neat binding properties to say checked dot bind equals to do dot done. And what this is going to do is we are binding any Boolean value here. So true or false, whatever this evaluates to. If it evaluates to false, then this input will not be checked. If it evaluates to true, then it will be checked. So I am going to go back to the browser and see, okay, that's great. It is false and we would expect it not to be checked, but maybe we want to make sure that this logic holds up and go back to our view model. And here we can say this dot to do dot done equals true. Okay, so now we would hope that if we save that, and based on our binding, this should now evaluate to true and the input should be checked. Let's go to our browser. Ah, perfect, it is. So that's great news. And I think I mentioned in the past video that two-way binding is one of the best features of this framework, and I still maintain that it is, because we're going to see how convenient this is in that the state on the view, so whatever state this checkbox is, whether it's checked or unchecked, will also translate to whether this dot done is true or false in the view model. And I'm going to show you why that's really cool. So perhaps when we change this checkbox from checked to unchecked, maybe we want something different to happen with this text here. I would expect that maybe we would want to see a line through it. So one thing we can do is go back to our view. So I'm going to actually space some things out within this list item because it's going to get a little bit more complex. So let me just break these out into lines, and then I will put a span around our to-do list item description. There we go. And then what I can do is Aurelia will let me conditionally bind a CSS property to this to-do list item description. So what I can do is say that the text decoration CSS property, and we can use our template literal here to evaluate an expression. We can say if to do is done, and I'm going to use a ternary operator here. If you're not used to those, you can look it up, but if the to do item is done, then put a line through the item. Otherwise, just have no text decoration. And I'm going to save that, and since in our view model we currently have set the only to-do item that we have as done, well, we would expect it to have a line through it. And so I'm going to go ahead and go to the application, and indeed it does. So that's really cool, but I'm going to show you something else really cool, is that if I uncheck this checkbox, hey, the line goes away. And I feel like we didn't explicitly tell it to do that, but that's cool, and that seems like desired behavior. And that's one really strong feature of Aurelia, and one really strong feature in general of two-way binding that you get with a lot of these front-end frameworks, is that by virtue of having checked the checkbox, we have two-way binding. So it's not just our view model telling the checkbox to be checked based on this done property, but we're also using our view to tell the ViewModel what the done property should be as well. So it's actually, that's the two-way feature of it. So by virtue of checking this checkbox, we have said that to-do.done is equal to true, or it's equal to false, and in turn that should also be reflected in this element. So that's some pretty cool stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and just, from our ViewModel, I'm going to remove manually setting it, and I will go back to the app and we can just play around with that a little bit, and that's pretty fun. Okay, so you might be thinking that, well, we have one to-do list item, but we actually might want a full to-do list with multiple items, which certainly makes plenty of sense. So instead of just having this .to-do, let's change it to this .to-do list. Maybe we can default it to an empty array, and then just for simplicity, we can just maybe push a couple new to-do items. Actually, we'll just go ahead and do 3 to-do items to our to-do list. We'll do clean my room. We will do walk the dog. And we will do take out the trash. Great, so now we have to-do list. So can we go to our view and say, well, okay, let's change all these instances of to-do to to-do list, and that'll take care of everything. And we'll save that, and let's go to our web page, and well, no, that doesn't work because we now have an array. We're not dealing with strings, we're not dealing with individual values, so yeah, of course that's not going to work. So instead what we can do is Aurelia offers us a nice repeater function. So within this list item element, which we want to repeat, we are just going to say repeat.for, and maybe we will say repeat for to-do of to-do list. So we are going to repeat this list item for every to-do in our to-do list. Pretty simple. Then we can change these back to just to-do. And what you're going to see happen is that Aurelia is going to take that and say, all right, our ViewModel has 3 to-dos in our to-do list, so it is going to repeat this list item and all of its contents each time, and it's going to take the properties that we've asked for and bind them to the DOM accordingly. So I'm going to go back to the page, and sure enough, here we go. All 3 are now displaying, and if I check each individual one, the properties are changing accordingly. So that's pretty cool. So let's add a little more functionality. Let's go ahead and say, well, maybe we will want to, oh, I don't know, add items to our to-do list. That seems like a pretty normal thing to want to do. So maybe we will go ahead and add an input. It'll be text, and we don't need to worry about the name attribute. And so we can say the value is new item, and we can add a little button here to submit that item. We will call that add. Just go ahead and save that and look at our page. That looks fine to me. Of course, we click on that add button and it doesn't do anything. That is to be expected. So what we can actually do is, well, this doesn't look very dynamic, and it definitely will not be very dynamic. So we can actually use a very similar behavior to this bind here. We can say value.bind, and instead of having text here, what we can do is have a reference to a property of the ViewModel. So maybe we will call it new item. And in our ViewModel, we can say this.new item. We could just go ahead and default that to an empty string. So now what we've done by doing this value bind here is that if I go back to the page, anything I type in here maybe it is do my homework. It is now going to have two-way binding and will be the value of this new item property, which is going to be great because when we click this button, we are going to basically be calling a method on our ViewModel here that will actually handle the value of new item. And I will show you exactly how right now. So in button, so what we can do is we can delegate the click of this button, and we can say add to do. And what this refers to is exactly what it might seem, is that in our app ViewModel, we can create a add to do method and start handling anything that we want here. So I told you that our input binds, or our value.bind is mapping this input to this.newItem. So within this add to do method that is delegated from the click of the add button, we can just go ahead and push a new to do item to our to do list, and we can do it this way. We can just do it this.to-do list. Dot push. We can push a new to do. And what's the description going to be? It is going to be this.newItem, which it's not necessarily equal to blank since this is tied to the front end input element. Hopefully that makes sense, and we can go check out the functionality on the front end. Let's say do my homework. We click add, and sure enough, it's added and has all the functionality of the other to-do list items. Super cool. You may have noticed though that do my homework doesn't clear out of here, and that might not be desired functionality. So what we can do is, and this is a pretty common design pattern, after we push this item, we can just say this.newItem equals an empty string again. Oop, new item is an empty string again, and that will go ahead and reset it, and we can try it out again, do my homework, and there we go. Now it's cleared out, and we can add more items, some other task. Add. Perfect. Now we are well on our way to making our to-do app something that's really fully functional. Perhaps the last item that we might want to do is remove a to-do item from the list. So let's go back to our view and say, all right, we'll put a to-do item removal button. Let's just put it right next to the item itself. That kind of makes sense to me. So we're going to do button here, and we'll say remove, and we can again use a click.delegate, and we'll say that equals to remove item. And instead of not having anything here, we'll actually put the to-do list item itself in there, because we're going to need some reference to it. When we go to our ViewModel, we can, let me see. So let's actually call this remove to do to be a little bit more consistent here. So we'll say remove to do, and it will take our to do item. And then what do we want to do here? We can just use, I mentioned this in a previous video, everything we're doing here is very much just JavaScript. If you look at this view model, it really looks like JavaScript, and that's what I'm going to use right now. I'm going to just use some array functions. If you don't necessarily know array functions that well, they're really, really handy. So what I'm going to do is say this.to-do list, and I know I'm going to be splicing the list. I'm going to take one item away from that list. And what item am I going to take? Well, I have to do the index of the item that I want to remove. So I'm going to say this dot to do list dot index of the to do item that we are passing to this method here. And so if I did this correctly, yeah, that looks like it might work. So we're simply delegating the click of this remove button, which is included inside the repeater. So there's going to be one next to each item in our list. We will see a button that says remove. And we're going to pass the to-do item to this remove to-do method. And we will handle it accordingly using a couple different array functions here. So let's go ahead and check that out in our browser. And so we see it's a little bit ugly, but I think it does the trick. And so if we click the remove button, yeah, it takes the item away. And I take them all out and there's no more lists. So maybe I'll go ahead and add walk the dog back. And there we go. And once again, functions. So we very quickly went from having nothing going on to a functional and interactive to-do list application. I thought that was really, really neat, and you get a lot of functionality really quickly just by using pure JavaScript and also by using some template binding behavior that Aurelia offers. So thank you for following along, and please do subscribe if you've enjoyed the tutorials so far, and I look forward to teaching you a little more.